Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. Today is going to be a book review slash first impressions of Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey, and kind of a first impression of the Pern series that she has. This was a commission. Thank you so very much to William Vogel, who did commission me for this video. I really appreciate that you are supporting my channel and that I can then in return give you content that you enjoy. So I'd love to hear what you guys think of my thoughts on this book, and I'm excited to go ahead and talk to you guys about it. Before I get started, if you do end up liking this video, it would be really great if you gave me a subscribe and a thumbs up. It really helps my channel, and I'd love to have our little community grow even bigger. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started on this review slash first impression slash discussion. It's going to be a little bit more detailed than my normal book reviews, so I'm not totally sure what category to put it in, but let's go ahead and talk about it. So, first, just a little bit of a summary for those of you who do not know about this book, as well as a little bit of a potential spoiler notification and the fact that I am going to be talking about some of the details of this book. So if you haven't read it and you're thinking you want to read it before hearing any discussions about it, then just be aware that this might not be the best video for you. Okay, so this book is the first book in the Dragon Riders of Pern, I believe is what the series is called. And in this book, in the world of Pern, we have Lessa, who becomes a new dragon rider. She is a werewoman, and she becomes the new rider, or newly connected to the queen, the newest queen dragon for the were. And she and the rest of the dragon riders in this particular where that she's at soon have to face these old threats called the Threads. So it is mostly a book about dragons and their riders. Let's go ahead and get started with talking about the writing style, because of course any book that you start, the first impression is the writing style. It does, when you first start this book, it does immediately feel a little bit like an older style book to me. And that's not to say that it's bad. I'm just saying that I can tell it has similar writing style to older novels, like sort of Shannara type, when those first were coming out, that kind of age writing. A little bit Lord of the Rings-ish, I guess you could say. It doesn't feel quite the same as that, but the closest thing I can think of is like sort of Shannara, maybe a little bit of Sword of Truth, of like that kind of writing style, a little bit of that deep descriptive writing style, but also has this very third-person omniscient narrator. And that's the thing that's most prominent for me, is that narrator is super distant from the characters. We have the characters and what they're doing, and the narrator who's narrating it knows everything that's going on with these characters, between the characters, and it's very much a narrator. It's not somebody who is part of the story or is very close to the story. It's definitely like an all-knowing God who is talking about what is going on, that he is observing and realizing what's going on. So very much a very distant narrator, and I find that that's usually, that distant narrator is a style that is often with older novels. Not like super, super old novels, but just older in the fantasy genre. The only thing about this writing style, or at least the writer's choices, McCaffrey's choices, is some of the names seemed very similar, especially at the beginning. And part of this might have been because I was listening to audiobook. Maybe if I saw the characters' names written out, it wouldn't have been so confusing. But many of these ones started with the same letter, the letter F, or at least the same F sound. And at first I was very confused on how to tell these different people apart until I got to know them better. So I will admit that that's the only thing about the writing, or at least McCaffrey's choices, that felt off to me, was the names of some of these men, because they seemed very, very similar. And I was getting confused on several of them, especially at the beginning, and trying to figure out who is what and who is saying what and who is doing what, who was good, who was bad, that kind of stuff. So that's the only thing that kind of tripped me up about it. But overall, solid writing style. It's clear, it's concise. We can tell like the descriptions and things like that. It just is definitely a little bit of that disconnect between the narrator and the characters, which for me personally, I prefer narrators that are closer to the characters, but that might also be because I read a lot of that kind of narration. So it is a little bit different to have that very distant, very unemotional narrator. Not that it's bad, just different. Okay, next let's go ahead and talk about the plot or the storyline. So this plot is a slow mover. This one definitely also reminds me of those older style fantasies and the fact that they are very much political based or social conflict based storylines instead of action adventures. Now, let me know what you think, because maybe you totally disagree with me on this statement, but this book definitely feels like the conflict is more about the social problems and the political boundaries of that than it is about like the threat to the world. Towards the end, we definitely get more toward like the world needs saving kind of thing. But for most of the book, it's very much what they have to do to like revive the dragon race and to get enough dragons to protect the world, and like trying to situate themselves that way the lords and stuff like that of the other areas will then continue to give them the tribute that they're owed. So it's much more of like a political based, social conflict based storyline, not an action adventure. We start off with the search for Lessa, or at least a werewoman that would be connected to the new queen dragon. We've got the other lords that are not giving their tribute and not giving the food that they're supposed to, and so they have to then figure out how to get those lords back on board and giving them the proper food for their dragons, and realizing that they do still need the dragons' protections. We have the whole fact that they have to rebuild the dragon race because there's not enough dragons to cover the threat. So it's a little bit different than a lot of more modern stories, I guess you could say. Not that modern stories don't have these political things, but they're just a little bit more of it's a slower mover, a little bit less of the action adventure. It still has some action to it. We do have some battles a little bit going on. We do have the suspense a little bit, but definitely not the focus of this particular book. Maybe down the line there'll be more books that have that aspect to them, but at least this first one did not have that very much. And I do in general prefer more action adventure based stories. I find that ones that have more political based storylines are a little too slow for me. I found that this one wasn't like too slow. I did still enjoy the storyline. It just was not as exciting or as amazing to me as other books that I have read. So let me know what you think on this plotline and what you think of like the difference between action adventure and this more political or society-based plotline. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your feelings about if you like that kind of storyline, if you prefer action adventure, if you like a blend, if you like both. Just give me your thoughts and what you think about this particular book if you've read this one. What you think about the plot line. If you find that it's a slow mover, if you find that actually it's pretty engaging, or whatever you think, I'd just love to hear your thoughts. Next, let's talk about characters. Overall, I don't have that much to say about characters, honestly. It took me a little while to connect to them. I think part of that was the name confusion that I had at the beginning, where there's like several characters that I was trying to figure out who was who. But I feel like because that narrator is so distant, it was harder for me to connect to the characters. And because it is that little bit of a slower plot line, it took me a little bit more to kind of warm up to the story as a whole. So overall, slow moving on the characters as well, but I did end up really liking Lessa and Fëanor, who are two most prominent characters. I did end up coming to really enjoy them. I think they are good characters. I do think that they are interesting, even if they are not one of my very favorite characters of all time. I do think that they were a good fit for this story, and I did enjoy learning more about them and seeing the growth that they had throughout this story. I don't feel like most of the other characters were really prominent enough to say like I made a really big connection to them, but I do also like the characters of their dragons. Obviously we can hear their thoughts and their interactions, and so mostly the two main characters and their dragons were kind of the most prominent characters that we really had a connection to, at least for me. And I did enjoy them and did become more and more invested in them as the book went on. I do think it would be interesting to read the next book and to see if those connections grow even stronger. Now, last but not least, let's talk a little bit about world building. So, overall, I really enjoyed the concept of this world. My favorite part of the book actually was the world building and the fantasy elements that are involved. I really like dragons a lot. I don't know if you guys can tell. I always have dragons up here on my bookshelf, and the logo for the channel is a dragon. But I like dragons a lot. I think they're super cool. I think there's a lot of interesting things that people have done with dragons and the way they've tweaked their personalities or how their magic works and stuff. Part of the main reason why I like Dragonland so much is that it is full of dragons. So I liked, again, that we have a new storyline here for dragons that I could become engaged in. I like the bond between the dragon and the rider. I like a lot of the dragon elements. I also like how Lessa could actually hear all the dragons too, and how that was a unique ability. I think that's also a really great tidbit that is kind of unique. And then I also liked the threads concept, how there are these threads that just fall from the sky and that they're really dangerous. I feel like that's a new concept. That is something that is unusual. It's not what you would find in every other book. So I did really like the uniqueness of this story of the world as a whole. I do think that that was part of its best, or my favorite parts about the book is the world, the dragons, the mythical elements, as well as the unique dangers that they are having to face. So, what do you think about this book as a whole? I think those are all the main things that I came up with to talk about for my first impression, or my little bit of a more in-depth review of it. Overall, I think it is interesting enough that I would pursue the second book. I am really happy that I was introduced to this series, but I don't think that this one totally blew me away. I think that I would need a couple more books to really engage myself in the characters and in the concepts, just because it is a little bit more of that slower mover of a plot, as well as that farther away narrator. So I think as I move forward in the books, and maybe as more events unraveled and the characters become a little bit more solidified for me, that I would really enjoy this. So I do think that it is worth pursuing the next book, even if this first book didn't just totally wow me. I still did enjoy it, and I still find a lot of it really interesting. So let me know what you guys think of this book if you've read it. I'd really like to hear your thoughts and opinions, and if you agree or disagree with anything I've said, I would just really love to hear about it. Okay, I guess that's it for me today. Thank you so much again to William for commissioning me and supporting my channel. It really means a lot, and I hope that you enjoyed my discussion on this book. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.